Welcome to Our Voices and Our Stories, where we are documenting the gay men living in Western North Carolina and the history of this diverse community. My name is Butch, and tonight I want to welcome to our discussion table here Michael Harney. Thank you for being here, Michael.
Thank you, Butch.
So, Michael, let's just start off. How does a guy from I believe you said Delaware, right?
Virginia.
Virginia. Oh, that's right, over on the coast.
Yep.
How does a guy from Virginia end up in Asheville, North Carolina?
Well, the simplest story is that I went to school at Belmont Abbey College and met my best friend, Patricia Adele, and she was from here. And after we graduated, about 2 years later, she called and asked if I would come down and paint her house that she had just bought and help her build a garden. And I never left. That was 1992.
How many times do we hear that story from people that come to Asheville and they just never leave?
Yeah, that's it.
That's what makes it so beautiful.
That's how I got here.
Yeah. So, what did you do when you moved here?
Well, so she's a really influential person in my life, and she saw in the newspaper that AB Tech was looking for somebody in the language lab. So I speak Spanish, and I applied for a job there. Her brother, Jerry Adele, some people would know or recognize the name if they ever went to what used to be called Gold's Gym, not the Gold's Gym that we have now, but the original Gold's Gym here in Asheville. I think now is Biltmore Athletic Club. Jerry was the manager there for years and years and years, and he gave me a job. So that was two jobs. And then I got a job at the Western North Carolina AIDS Project, and then I got a job at Blue Ridge Community College. And that's where I work in all of those places except for the gym now.
Does it take that many jobs to live in Asheville still?
For me, it does. Right. I have never been a big earner, don't have any kind of inheritance or anything like that. And it does take probably good 3 jobs to do the things that I do, to continue to be philanthropic and, to make sure that my bills are paid.
Yeah, we'll talk more about Michael's philanthropic activities here in a bit. But tell me, what was it like growing up for you, coming out, all that?
So I was born in Newport News, Virginia, at a hospital called Riverside Hospital. I think the name has changed now. It's that many years ago. I'm 59 years old as of this interview, so I was born in 1966. And I don't normally tell people that. I usually tell them I'm 72, and I look pretty damn good, don't I?
You always look
for
good
72. So I was born there, but lived in Hampton. So I always say I'm from Hampton, Newport News, Virginia. It was the peninsula along the coast. And
military.
It was a military. All the military branches are represented in that region, though my family was not in the military. And so I met people whose families were, and, they came and went all my life. I met lots and lots of people and got to be exposed to lots of different cultural aspects from people from around the world. We always had exchange students in our school systems, and so we had exchange students that stayed with our family. We participated in that sort of thing, and then had exchange students in my junior high and high school that I stayed in touch with for years and was able to go visit them around the world a little bit,
wow,
mostly
that's
in Europe.
wonderful.
And coming out was a little bit of a different process. So I was already, I say, sexually active as a young child. People say, oh, that was just playing around, or, your neighbor kid or whatever, that sort of thing. But it really was, I can remember, I don't know if I should say their names or not, but I will. Thomas Adsit was the first little boy. And I mean, like, we were very, very little. I'm talking about 5, 6, 7 years of age that I can remember. I don't know how it got started. I don't know why. And his family moved away. And I remember Jeff Merritt was a boy in my neighborhood. He was a couple of years older than I, but he and I were sexually active and, for years. And I remember one time when I was 13 saying to him, wow, this is so neat being gay. And he was not able to really accept that at the time. And he told me, you shut up. You don't say that kind of stuff. You never say that. And so it was kind of suppressed and oppressed for a while, even just between the two of us, no matter what we had done. And yet I knew in my heart and soul who I was and what I was, and
So
all
I'm
of that.
curious, a lot of people struggle with that at that age,
Yeah,
as early adolescent years, but you're already using the word gay at that
right. I
point.
knew it. I already knew that. And it was very clear to me. There was no hiding it. You know what I mean? Anyway, if you look at some old pictures of me, there was no hiding it. I remember being fascinated by the hippie boys, the long hair that
Yep.
they had, and their toenails were painted. And I remember they would wear flip-flops, and during the summer you could see
Yep.
their toes were painted all these variety of colors. And I just thought that was so fascinating. And some of the long-haired hippie boys in my neighborhood, so this was the 70s, the early 70s, I just remember all of that. Anyway, throughout my lifetime, knowing that I was gay, I had a couple of interactions, but was, like I said, sexually active at a younger age. And I guess the first really coming out was to my mother. I was probably 19 or 20. I don't remember exactly, but she was taking me back to Richmond, Virginia. She was driving me back to meet some people who were going to be taking me back to college. They were
Okay.
coming back from New York or New Jersey. Many of the people that went to school at Belmont Abbey College, which is down between Gastonia and Charlotte, North Carolina, they would travel home for whatever the break was. I don't know,
Right,
spring break or
right.
fall break. So she was taking me to Richmond and asked me if I had a problem with women. And I understood what she was asking, but I looked at her and said, no, I love women. They're wonderful. I support them. I'm completely, about women's rights, women's equality, women's everything. I said, but if you're asking me if I'm gay, yes. And she about drove off the highway. I always say, that sort of thing.
That was kind of her roundabout way, though, of getting you to talk.
Right. I think it's really hard for parents to ask their children,
yes.
are you gay? Or they don't know the terminology. Are you homosexual? That kind of thing. And so she couldn't really understand it. I don't think she wanted to know, even though, like I said, it was so obvious. How could you not have known? She must have. But it was clarified then. And she asked that I not say anything to anybody, particularly to my father. And so for another year or so, school went on, came back home, and I was fixing dinner. So I'm the eldest of 6 children.
Okay.
And I was fixing dinner when I happened to be home at this, whatever, it may have been break, it may have been the summer, I don't remember. And my 2 sisters, I have 2 sisters and 3 brothers. My 2 sisters were sitting at the dinner table, and they said, "Oh, someday you're going to make a woman such a great husband." And that was the straw that broke my back. And I turned to them and I said, "No, someday I'll make a man a good husband." And they were like, "What? What? What?" And so that afternoon, everybody but my second to youngest brother, who was not living in Hampton, they all found out. They all heard that day. My father came in, and before he was the last person to hear that I am gay, that I was gay, I said to him when he came in the door, I said, before you're the last, because Mark wasn't there, I said, I've come out to everybody in the family, I'm gay. And he said, "Oh, well, that's all right." He said, "Is this your coming out then? This is what it is?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I still love you," and give me a big hug and all that kind of thing.
That's wonderful.
And that's how it came to be.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
It's the way it should be for everybody, but unfortunately it's not. So
it is
good
not.
for you to
No,
have
it's
that
tragic
family.
sometimes. Mm-hmm.
Good. So then you move on into adulthood.
Right.
Being gay.
Right. Openly gay. To the extent that we are, that I am, I think that sometimes we still have a certain internal homophobia. In some of the jobs I've had over the years, I'll never deny it, but I don't necessarily come in and say, "Hi, my name's Michael and I'm gay."
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
But if you can't figure it out, or you haven't looked into my background or found an archive or a photo or a column or something,
Well, it's a part of who you are, but it doesn't identify you
Right.
necessarily.
There's a lot of things that
Yeah.
identify us and identify me, myself. And so, yeah,
What are some of those things that identify you?
I am a workaholic.
Yes. Yes, you
That's
are.
probably my first identifying trait. Um, I'm a bit of a naturalist. Um, people call me a Luddite. I'm not technological, so I don't have a cell phone, which always bewilders people.
Well, you're not trapped.
People have negative descriptions of their experience with cell phones sometimes,
Yeah.
and yet they're everywhere, and they're so vital to much of what any and everybody does nowadays. Communication, banking, mapping. I have an old-timey map in my car. That's how I find the roadway. Or you can tell me how to get there and give me some, I think you said to get here. You go down, take it all the way to the end of the building. You'll see the entrance to the left. And that's all I needed. And there I was. You found me there. So that's some of a little bit of who I am, perhaps.
Cool. So tell me, how did you end up going to work? I mean, this was when WinCap was just new, wasn't it?
Well, the Western North Carolina AIDS Project, we call WNCAP, WNCAP, started in 1986. So 85, 86, people were coming back home from some of the bigger cities, California, New York, Chicago, wherever, Miami, coming back home here to Asheville into the Western North Carolina region to die of AIDS.
Yeah.
There was that time period. And there was a response. So I wasn't here then. I got here in 92, recall. But there was a response within the community. And there are others who were here at the time and many who are no longer here. They came together in one of our local bars and said, we've got to do something. We can do enough drag, show fundraisers and, potlucks and chili cook-offs and whatever to raise some money for Billy and Tommy and Sam and Jim and Mike and whoever who needed their rent paid, who needed a place to stay, who needed electric paid, whatever it was. And they got together with Galen Ehrlichman at the health department. She was originally an educator, and she was part of community prevention. And she was assigned to meet with these people in the community who were trying to figure out a response to AIDS in this region. She didn't know anything much about it, and she didn't know the community that well, but they all came together and created what eventually became known as the Western North Carolina AIDS Project in response. So they needed a formal response. There was case management needed. You needed buddies. This whole buddy system that we don't hear much about anymore was vital to people finding the support, having the support that they needed.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I know you and I have talked about that whole peer support network from the olden days and how vital that was. And I'm wondering, I feel like in a lot of ways that's still vital to the community and to a lot of people that are going through it, but it doesn't seem to exist as much.
Yeah, it was a little bit different. So everything, changes and I guess evolves to a certain extent. You're right that there are still people living with HIV, but now the word AIDS is not used as much. People are certainly not dying of AIDS-related causes to the extent that they were. And I'll tell you another example, and leading back to this discussion about the buddies and the peer systems. So every year, I update the list of names. If anybody's familiar with the Names Project AIDS Memorial, quilts, every year I update the names of those clients of ours at WNCAP who've passed, who've died. And I was given that list by Bill Allen. Some would remember him. Some of the people that you've interviewed might remember Bill Allen. And it was a real honor that he gave that list to me and asked me to keep it and to update it and to share it. So every year I do that. And last year there were only 9 people in the whole year from our list of clients, we serve about roughly 400 people living with HIV in the 18 counties of Western North Carolina. That's our what we call catchment area, our region. There are about somewhere around 2,000 people living with HIV in the region, but 400 or so of them come to our agency for the case management services that are provided by those social workers. And so that's different compared to what it was. And you and I know, and others listening and, watching these videos know that people were dying in the hundreds, and it was weekly and monthly, and, they're gone. We've lost somewhere around 700,000 people to AIDS in this country alone. And still 40 million people are thought to be living with HIV and AIDS around the world today. 39,000 new HIV infections reported in this country every year.
Right.
Still. So, science is looking at 2050 that we're going to still be dealing with HIV and AIDS. All that to say, back then, people were dying, and they didn't have the support systems that are in place so much so now. And the medications that people were taking were harder to take than the single tablet regimens that people take nowadays. Yeah. The side effects were awful. People were, threw up, and they had terrible explosive diarrhea and just awful stuff. The lipodystrophy, and their bodies just changed physically and physiologically.
And mentally.
So the buddy system, how I experienced it, and it was certainly different everywhere. Where there are more resources, there are better systems, right? You're talking about rural communities, it didn't exist. Right. But in bigger cities like Asheville, for example, in our region, you had volunteers. And the volunteers knew people who were living with HIV, whether they themselves were or were not, but they were able to go and maybe make some meals, or bring some meals, or walk the dogs, or take somebody to breakfast once a week, once every 2 weeks, to give a phone call or two. And that's what volunteers did. And so there's Nan Williamson is one of the volunteers who still today works at Loving Food Resources, our food bank that serves people with HIV and in-home hospice care and part of the LGBTQ community who are food insecure. But it was a response. LFR, Loving Food Resources, was a response to people's need for food.
Right.
They couldn't work maybe because of the side effects, because the disability of HIV and of AIDS, and disability checks, because our federal government doesn't like anybody on disability to work enough to pay their bills or extra. You know what I mean? So you work a little bit, they cut your benefits. And I am and can be in this country critical of the government in that sense, that I think we need a safety net, and that's a great idea. But if I want to make a couple more extra dollars doing other things, I should be able to and not penalized for the safety net that stays in place at that level.
Exactly.
So, anyway, that's what buddies did, and people were assigned. And if you and your buddy didn't really get along, you weren't compatible, well, you moved on to somebody else maybe and found that compatibility. There were men, there were women, they were younger, they were older, they were gay, they were straight.
Right.
And
how did you deal, and how do you still deal with the emotional toll that takes on an individual?
People sometimes ask that. Aren't you burned out? How do you keep from burning out? How do you take care of yourself? First of all, I would say that I'm very lucky in the world. If I could give back this much, and I'm just, if you're just listening in, it's less than an inch. If I could just give back this much of the good I've received in my lifetime, the world would change dramatically. That's how much good I've had in my life. I say that, and I truly believe that. My days are flexible. My days, like right now, I get to come and be part of this with you, and how exciting. And your cameramen and, the technicians here that are working. I love this. This is so nice, and what an honor to be here. So this is enriching to me, which gives me the energy to keep moving through the rest of the day until tomorrow. And I'll take with me the energy that I'm gaining from this, for example, and utilize some of that tomorrow. Not all of it.
All right.
But some of it, where I need a little bit of it, this boost. And I'll tell somebody about this story and this experience. And so every day I take care of me. First and foremost, I always take care of me. I suggest that others do the same. I'm not being selfish. Self-preservation is what's important. And so the emotional toll that it takes on some people is, I guess it's personalized.
Yeah.
I feel it has been an honor, and it's been given to me the power to do the things that I do. The experiences that I have had comes from way beyond me. I can't explain it. I don't know why I'm pushed to, why I'm given the opportunities, even like this. Why did it come to me and not to, 50 other gay men or, whoever in the community? Maybe they're on the list. Maybe they're next. I don't know.
Maybe they need to be on the list.
They need to be on the list. But I've also been able to experience things that are so profoundly moving. The death and dying experience in this field in the early days. And I rarely get a chance anymore because people are living, they're thriving, they don't die like they used to. But to have been there when people take that last breath is the greatest gift, I believe, there's ever been shared with me multiple times. Now, there are others who said they can't take it anymore. They can't see another person die. They don't want to be part of that. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to go to another funeral. I love a good funeral. And I like a good funeral that tells stories, that shares something fun and funny and beautiful
share some
photos.
laughter.
Yes. Find that. So
you're very passionate about this work that you do in HIV and AIDS. And I'm wondering, did that just come once you started working? Because you could have gone into any number of fields, I'm sure, and what you're doing, and what made you decide this is where I'm devoting my life?
Again, it's inexplicable. My background, so look, I was born 1966. Yeah. Is that the kind of the love and free love and, all that kind of stuff and the hippie kind of spirituality and all that? Maybe that influenced some of me. Yeah. My parents, with all the other craziness in their lives, our lives or whatever, they took us. So I was brought up in a Catholic church, but it was a downtown Newport News Catholic church. So it had beautiful old stained glasses, 1927 kind of built Catholic church in the downtown Newport News area. It was St. Vincent's is what it was called. And so you could go in there, whether you're listening to anything. There was they had a band, I don't know, what do you call it, a folk band, but they had electric guitars and a drummer, and there's a bassist. Anthony was a bassist, and Grace and Rita, and it was alive. But you could look at all the beautiful stained glass and just let your spirit ride. So part of that, I think, was an influence. We had the Social Action Center, and we would have spaghetti dinners and bring people that were unfed to be fed. And bingo, you've been to a bingo hall or something. Well, This was church bingo, and so I was very community involved in that. My father was very community involved with the JCs, for example, and he was always, making sure that we as children, as a family, did things in the community. Like I said, we had exchange students, so we invited people in to stay with us, and we didn't use derogatory demographic language.
Right.
We were not permitted to. It was not something that we heard in our household. And yet I was aware of it and certainly heard it in the community in general. We didn't speak like that. And so it was just all part of me growing up doing it. So when I got here, my degree, I have a degree in business administration. I have a degree in Spanish. I never thought I'd be doing this. I have no degree in medical, social work, anything like that. And really how I got involved with WingCap was that we had a bar in town that some would remember. Scandals was its name, and the owner was Art Fryer.
Yep.
And in 1993, there was a big gay liberation march on Washington.
Yes.
And I bought 200 of the rainbow necklaces. You remember they used to have the rings, the freedom
Yes,
necklaces
yes,
with all the
yes.
colors on them. And I asked Art Fryer if I could sell them in the bar, one for 12 or two for 20. And I was going to give 20% of the proceeds to the Western North Carolina AIDS Project. So it was more of a business kind of, that was the business side of it, right? And he said, well, that's fine, except you need to go speak to this guy named Marty Prairie. And Marty Prairie worked at WingCap. He worked in the department, in the education department where I now work. And he was the guy that used to bring the condoms in, and around town, that kind of thing, to the bars. And so I said, okay, I'll do that. So I took this donation and I went to Marty and I said, Art Fryer at Scandal said I need to meet you. And is it okay if I sell these necklaces and give you this money? And he was like, yeah, we'll take your money, but is that your pickup truck out there? Like, can you? I drive a 1986 Toyota pickup truck. It's now 40 years old and it's still driving. I just had the brakes and clutch worked on this week. I suspect I'll have it until I die. I don't know, until it dies first. But Marty said, yes, could you help us move this lady's furniture? And I was like, well, yeah, here's your donation and sure. And can you sit at our Bell Share booth? We used to have this huge festival, 300,000 people in a weekend called Bell Share here in Asheville. And could I sit there and volunteer? I said, sure, okay, whatever. And he eventually asked if I wanted to do some street outreach. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll do that. What is it? I didn't know what he was talking about. That's how I got started in all of that. But why, how, I don't know. That's what, the connections and the reasons our paths cross sometimes.
It's amazing when we get out of our way.
That's
and
right.
Just let life happen.
It does.
And where it leads us.
It takes me.
Let's take a quick break right here. And when we come back, I want to talk about you and your experience being the condom man or the rubber man or whatever they call them nowadays.
Yeah.
But I also want to talk about how that relates to your experience in gay culture and what you've seen change over the years in the gays, in the bars, in the crowds, and the attitudes towards HIV and AIDS, and just gay men in general.
Okay, let's do it.
All right.